name is Kyle Patterson, and I am the Director of Business Development with Bryson Insurance. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. We will be recording this webinar, but we do want to respect everybody's time, so we will be starting now and expect that other people will be registering or jumping in as we go. Sitting next to me is Darnley, and I will introduce him in more detail in a little bit. And I just also want to note that Mark is in the room with us as well. He will be monitoring any chat or questions as we go to make sure at the end, if you have questions, that we get them answered for you. So feel free to post in the chat any questions as we go. So thank you for joining our very first webinar on how do cyber data breaches happen. This is a very important and growing topic, and we're going to jump into it today, why it's important. So what we're going to cover in this webinar is why are we now engaged in this discussion in such a big way? What is a data breach? One thing we've uncovered is that a lot of people want to do something about cybersecurity, but actually feel overwhelmed until they recognize that maybe they don't even just know how simple it is, how simple a data breach occurs, and that there's a lot of things that a human can actually do to prevent it. We'll go through then the two most common ways that a data breach initiates. The four most common ways that once that malicious software gets inside of your network or computer, what happens there. What then happens when your data is breached, like where does the data go? And steps to reduce risk, and then we'll of course answer any questions you have. So first I'm just going to start with why is this an important conversation today, especially here in Canada. So the federal government has delayed but are pushing forward a mandatory data breach reporting system. So if you in the future suffer a data breach, it's going to be required that you notify not only the federal government but also anybody who's potentially impacted. So that would be people like your clients, employees, even suppliers and other people that are connected with your organization. Also, an important fact is that over 60% of businesses that are positive, like that suffer a data breach, are out of business within 6 months. Now, you know, this data is not full and complete because still a lot of companies are not reporting their data breaches. But this is by the best guess with all the data that they have available today. In Canada, it's estimated that the average data breach actually costs $4 million. And the biggest cost factors that are inside of that, because you know, you think like, oh, it's just the data being breached and our systems being down. But there's things like engaging in forensic experts, hiring a law firm, doing crisis management, and then indirect costs of actual time, resources spent notifying victims and investigating the incident, and as well as just the actual reputation or goodwill with clients and employees. And this is a pretty troubling fact. So there is a 1 in 4 chance that your business is going to be suffering some sort of data breach this year. The global average is actually 28%, and you have a much better chance of having a data breach than you do of dating a millionaire by a very wide margin. Okay. But sometimes this all seems really big, and it's still hard to sort of get what it looks like. So we decided to just look at 2 recent case studies of businesses that you can more wrap your head around, because all we hear about is the Uber, the Yahoos, all the big data breaches, but it's hard to bring it to reality. So here, for example, was a case of a ransomware attack, which Darnley will get us into in a little bit. But a hospital actually was subjected to an attack, and the attacker only sought a $500 payment to get the data back. But what was left in the background was a system that was shut down. So you can see here the hospital actually had to go back to a paper-based form of tracking what's going on with all their patients. And a whole bunch of other issues kind of populated. So it's actually so far costed more than $700,000 to do the forensics, which is looking into the issue and making sure everything's back, data recovery, business interruption, and then the actual crisis management for the hospital. The second case study is a phishing attack. So they're called bad actors, and somebody played the CEO of a company and asked the HR manager for all of the W-2 tax forms for last year. And so that HR manager complied and sent 4,000 records out to this person, and it was a spoof. And so far, it's costed the company $70,000 in legal fees, notifying everybody who's been impacted, all the call center services, credit monitoring, and they're still now they're being sued by former employees, and so now there's still additional costs that are outstanding. So that gives you a bit of sort of background, but now let's get into the thick of this. And so it's my pleasure to now formally introduce Darnley. Darnley's from Darnley IT Consulting, and he is incredibly intelligent and knowledgeable on all things IT related. He's got a huge passion, not just for technology, but also helping people better understand what they can do to prevent things. In his past, he's worked with institutions like Deloitte, Princess Margaret Hospital, the University of Toronto, and even our Canadian intelligence agency, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, CSIS. So without further ado, let's welcome Darnley.
Thank you, Kyle. Good morning, everyone. So we're going to talk today about what is a data breach. So as you can see there, an incident in which sensitive, protected, or confidential data has been viewed or stolen without owner's consent. So this kind of puts a light on what's entailed inside of a breach. So credit card numbers, customer data, trade secrets, IP, SIN numbers, address information, emails, and national security matters. And I had to throw that last part in. IP, is intellectual property. So anything that like your business has that basically makes up for your anything special that your business has or something you created yourself gets potentially leaked on the web. Also, hacking and malware. That means a malicious attack for either internal or external, and a malware. So a piece of software that's installed either in an attachment or installed on a computer system or a mobile device that it basically expands and infects the rest of the network. Device loss, so that means a mobile device, so like a laptop, tablet, cell phone that has company data residing on it, or basically has an attachment to a cloud-based service or a private cloud service. That being leaked if the device is not properly closed or encrypted, that information can be leaked and exposed. Internal employee leak, so that means if there's a outgoing employee or an employee that is doing malicious things on the network, so that means stealing company secrets, stealing company information, customer lists, etc. Unintended disclosure, that again is something that's accidental, so sending a wrong email attachment to someone you shouldn't, or someone in your address list that's not really known, and an unknown disclosure, which is various unknown variables that I can't specify about. So this really puts something powerful in the amount of data breaches over the years. So I'm sure you heard in the news, it's pretty front and center nowadays, is with Equifax. In this year, Equifax have lost 143 million records. And if I'm recalling correctly, top of my mind, a report was released yesterday that was over 16 million records, Canadian records were lost, if I'm recalling correctly. Don't quote me on that. In 2016, LinkedIn, over 117 million records were lost. And 2015, Ashley Madison, 37 million records were leaked. eBay 2014, 145 million, and the biggest one in 2013 is Yahoo with 3 billion records stolen. So this really emphasizes on the amount of data in a quick snapshot that is now released on the internet. So the two of the most common data breaches, now this is just some of the ones that we're focusing on, but again, it's really not everything, but this is just two of the most important facts here. So phishing and spear phishing. What phishing basically is, that those who are not aware of it, is an email that you get which basically asks to click on a particular link. It asks for a specific information, or it targets, so like what Kyle mentioned about the CEO asking for records. It specifically attacked, and that's the premise of spear phishing, the CFO to basically release certain financial information to make it look like it's coming from the CEO. And unsecured mobile devices, and this is very important because As we grow technologically, and a lot of businesses are adopting mobile technologies, what this is doing is putting that information on the corporation or the business onto mobile applications. So laptops, tablets, and cell phones alike that are now have access to these various types of information. And if these devices aren't secured properly, what happens now is if there's ever, like I mentioned earlier, a device loss, for example, that device will have company information like customer records, financial information, whatever. That's now, if it's fallen into the wrong hands, can and probably will be used against the company. So what do they have in common? Basically, both utilize human error. You can see that the first two examples I mentioned had nothing to do with firewalls, antivirus, and proper protection procedures. It has everything to do with the human factor in all of this. And lack of end-user education. Education is the cornerstone of cybersecurity when it comes to a business. The reason being is because what this does, it helps your employees, it helps yourself understand the risks that are out there, the potentials, what may or may not happen out there in the field. So education, again, is very important because that helps your employees and helps your business being able to understand the full model of cybersecurity. The high-risk security threats for organizations. So what this means is when the actual threat becomes released, if your company data gets released on the internet, that can be used against your employees, that can be used against your customers, and what happens is it's a well-known threat, and it can have severe repercussions against your business, either in today or in the future. So opportunities for organizations, training, assessment of your IT infrastructure, and data protection services. So these are basically things that as a business you must look at in order to keep that foundation kind of very solid, so that helps makes your business a lot more resilient when it comes to cyber threats. And another attack, we won't get into details, but on the bottom there for brute force attack, it's another common data breach as well, which just in short basically means some outsider trying to gain access to the internal network.
Beautiful. Okay, so let's take a look at the now when there's an actual breach, what happens now that the computer is impacted?
Exactly. So in phishing attacks, email attachments is the most common thing, and I've seen this, very frequently in all sorts of events. Phishing attacks basically means that, for example, if you receive an email from someone that you know or may not know, and says in the subject line, this may be a particular attachment for a financial document, for example, and it looks like it's a legitimate email, it looks like it's a legitimate person, you can open that attachment. It may or may not be a legitimate document, but what happens here is that the infection comes into your computer system and may potentially spread across the network. So something that simple, even if the sender is not aware of it, if their machine is infected, they may not be completely aware of it. Public network access. Again, a very growing and severe problem that's experienced alike. A lot of mobile users are people who access company resources, so company laptops, company cell phones or tablets, into public networks. So for example, coffee shops or airports that have public Wi-Fi. What happens here is that there's an attacker sitting on that network. If a device is not secure and accessing that wireless network, any sort of trade secrets or company information that's being relayed back and forth can be intercepted and can be used against you. Social engineering. Clickbait's one of the other things where you would it would try to get you to click on something on the email attachment, either a link saying, oh, this is the look at me from my vacation, or look at this new report that we released. Things like that can gain access to your computer systems from there. And bait and switch is just basically, it's a legitimate program, or it looks like a legitimate program that you must download. So for a quick example, if your IT department sends you an email saying, look, this is this new Adobe update, it all looks legitimate, you actually click on it, install it, it looks legitimate, but in actuality, it is not.
Great, thank you. And so we wanted to show this as well. So this was actually something that we received recently. And this is actually Kelsey's email that she received from Microsoft. So at first look, it looks like it's something that could actually be from Microsoft. And so I wanted Darnley just to kind of walk through this, not in a great detail, but just kind of give like an idea of how easy something could look real.
Exactly. So if you can see in the top there from the from address, it says Office Corporation. So some people will arbitrarily assume that's from Microsoft. But if a quick look and the domain name, so you'll see there it says mail to officialms@security-system.com. We all know right then and there, that's a red flag because that's not the usual office.com address. When it comes down, if you look at the Microsoft authentication settings, that should raise a flag there. But as well as, if you look on the bottom, there in blue highlight, you'll see office365.account/restore.settings.update. That is actually not a link. It's a picture, basically, that's highlighted in blue, where if you actually hover over it with your mouse, you'll see it'll take you to a completely different web address. And I'm glad Kyle showed this to me as well, because this is a typical phishing attack where we don't know where that link will go to. We never clicked on it. But if Kyle said, okay, well, let's click on it and see where this goes, this can either infect the computer or direct him to a Microsoft-looking like website, and we'll ask him for his Microsoft credentials, and that can just keep going on with the cycle of cyber attacks from that regard. So that's kind of a very light-based overview of that particular email.
Beautiful. And what's actually interesting with this one and ones like this is that it didn't just go to Kelsey, it actually went to most email addresses in our network. So it would only take one person to do something about this, and we'll come back to this in a bit, because what Kelsey and other team members did actually prevented this from going any further really quickly. But let's say you clicked on it and took that action. What could the future look like? It could look like this.
Very, very scary, and I see this more times than I count on my fingers and toes. This is just a basic image of a Cryptolocker, crypto virus. There's different variants of it, but this is the most common one that you see there. Now, when you see this, it's usually too late. It's not a great time to put something to action after you see this, but we're illustrating this, and you can see the dollar value down there. And you can say, well, hold on, where did this come from? If you can see the screen there, under the Bitcoins, where it asks you for the ransom, it asks for 600 Bitcoins. And this number, we came with this number a few weeks ago, or a week ago, and this is probably outdated right now. So if you look at the value that's worth 600 Bitcoins today, this dollar amount under the screen there is actually in Canadian, and that's a lot of money. So you don't want to be in the hardship where you get this message and it's asking for 600 Bitcoins. Now, it's never always 600 Bitcoins. They can change back and forth, but this illustrates how severe these things can be. And even if you paid the $6 million, for example, there's even no guarantee that you can actually get your data back. So a general rule of thumb here is if and when you see this, not to pay the ransom, because then your company's put back on a whitelist.
Beautiful.
Essentially.
Thanks. And just so you guys know too, this is actually the screen from that WannaCry virus that that was very popular, rummaging through mostly Eastern Europe. Okay, so jump into this.
So combating human failure. So these are some of the filtration system, as I call it, and steps that your company can and should take in order to combat human failures. Now, this is nothing against your staff. This is not meant to be a personal attack. But these are some steps a company must put through in order to properly protect themselves. So obviously, step one is education. If no one, ignorance is bliss. If no one knows how to look at and assess an email, or if they're being phished or spear phished, they're going to click on it. They're not going to be aware of it. So, like I said here, educating staff on the importance of cybersecurity, first and foremost, of three things. Keeping a cyber-safe mindset. So making sure that your staff and yourselves actually have the right mindsets as you go through the information superhighway when you're doing your work, is to have that sort of security cap on, not to the extent of someone like myself, but enough to get by to know, okay, this raises a red flag for us. Inform of IT if anything looks weird before you download or open anything. So, for example, the email Kyle sent me through Kelsey, right?
Yeah.
She sent Kyle this email address, or the email, the phishing email that you've seen in a previous slide. Even though Kyle's not IT, Kyle was able to say, you know what, this is not legitimate. Don't click on the link. So informing your IT staff, if you have an in-house or a managed services provider, inform the company of the email, forward it off to them, and they'll be able to confirm if it is or not an email. Or if it's from the CEO, pick up the phone, call him or her, and ask them if this is a legitimate email, if this is something that they sent you.
And just a quick aside to that too, when we did send it off to our IT department, they ended up blocking that domain, so we would no longer get future emails from that place.
Exactly. So that's a great example right there too, Kyle, is when you inform your IT department, they'll be able to take the countermeasures to make sure that doesn't happen again from that domain name in the future. Make sure emails with a request, a link, or file are coming from another person. So kind of going back to what I said, pick up the phone and call the person who sent that email. If Kyle sent that email to me, Kyle, did you send me that attachment? Yes, Tony. Taking that 2 seconds will save you from a world of pain if it comes to getting a crypto virus on your machine. Most important is legal. Setting strong policies in the workplace. A lot of businesses fail to come across this point because they don't really have, a cybersecurity mindset. So setting very strong policies to tell your staff what you can or cannot do and certain steps to take place if and when something does happen inside the workplace or with a company-owned device. And system. Data protection is very key and paramount in today's livelihood because you can counteract downtime. That is very important because a lot of businesses don't realize that time is money, and if your systems go down even for a few hours, what kind of detriment would that be for your organization moving forward? Obviously having some sort of intrusion protection, domain name service filtration system, and having frequent password changes, so not having one global password through all your accounts. And obviously touching quickly on cyber insurance. This is a very important one as well, because this is and lasts for a reason, because when something does happen, it happens pretty quickly, and it circumvents everything else you have in place. So if you have the proper protection, you have the proper policies, again, at the end of the day, your company may become infected and you have to do some disaster recovery on that way. So that's where cyber insurance will become very relevant to help protect some of your assets and protect, again, the monetary value of some of these threats, as Kyle mentioned earlier on in the slides.
Beautiful. So thank you. That's the formal part of our conversation today. Do you want to talk quickly about the Get Cyber Safe?
Yeah. So,
and just before you do, questions. Feel free now to start typing any questions you may have.
Yeah. So just quickly on the cyber safe aspect on it, this is a very, very useful tool for businesses and individuals alike. So if you're looking for some advice personally, the Canadian government launched getcybersafe.gc.ca. It has a plethora of resources for you, for your business, to the point where you can actually have infographics that you can put on either in your workplace. You can have some awareness campaigns as well. There's some do's and don'ts, some very strong and powerful information that you can give to your employees. So that's a very excellent resource for companies of all sizes to utilize just to get that cybersecurity mindset.
Beautiful. Okay. And also, just so you see at the bottom there, the compliance bulletin. So we'll make sure that you have a copy of this if you don't have one already. It's really important to know what the government's going to be asking for and know where they are in their process. It should be coming out literally any week now. They've already finished the last draft. Now it's just going through the approval process. So we do have one question here. It's from Mark. What's your take on bring your own devices? Which is bring your own phone instead of having a company issued phone, just so you guys know.
So there's ups and downs to bringing your own device to the workplace. Obviously, the upside to businesses is you don't have to heavily invest in new infrastructure. So you don't have to pay for new mobile devices. You can just piggyback off of what your employee has. Now, that's a good and bad thing, because if you look at it this way, let's say, for example, your cell phone, if you say, okay, well, we don't have a company-issued cell phone, the management aspect of it is going to be a little difficult because it's not actually your business-owned device. So there's only so many things you can do to secure that device. And as well as you don't know what that individual does when they go off on their own and they access different sites or different wireless access points or coffee shops or airports, as I explained earlier. So that really shrouds it in a mystery. It's a good thing for businesses, but at the same time, it allows their employees to have full access so they can access company resources with their own device without having to carry 2 cell phones or 2 tablets or 2 laptops everywhere. It just allows them to have more diversity in the network. But again, on the downside is the business won't have any, or the IT department won't have any foothold into the device, because quite frankly, they'll come up in arms if an IT department says, well, yeah, we have to lock down your device. They bought it at the end of the day, so they can pretty much do whatever they like to do with it at the end of the day. But that's a huge security concern when it comes to properly locking down your network. But there are things around that to to properly protect your business, but we can't get into that today.
And I have a question too. So, you know, like you think like, oh, you can do whatever you'd like with IT security and all this backup of all these protocols, but it does just take sort of one human error to cause this at the end of the day.
Exactly.
So with data, having it stored, as you recommend not to necessarily pay to get the data back when it gets into that Cryptolocker, for example. So what's the best way, or what way would you recommend companies back up their data so that they are well prepared in case something were to happen?
That's a great question. So with going on what Kyle was saying, is all the businesses have a backup solution, but it's more of a set it and forget it or set it and pray sort of scenario where you basically copy, like the traditional mindset when it comes to backup is, okay, well, I have this external drive or I have the server that copies it off. Now the server can be on-prem or it can be off-site as well. But there's some fundamental security risks in that in itself, where, you know, I've seen instances where those cloud solutions actually become encrypted as well with those Cryptolocker viruses, or it takes a really long time to get that information off the cloud and put it back onto resources. So having a sort of a data continuity solution in place, there's different ways of doing it, but having a data continuity solution in place is very key to counteract the downtimes when it comes to that. So not having your eggs in one basket, as you will, to say this is where everything is, this is where everything is going to be, is having a continuity solution. So basically having it in different places and in different hybrid solutions to kind of counteract that downtime if and when a crypto virus like that happens on the network.
Okay, and I actually do have one more question, and again, feel free to ask a question if you do have one, but when Darnley and I were talking a little while ago, he was telling me about being in a coffee shop, so I want to just share this example, but I also have a question around how to be secure, right? So Darnley was telling me he was in a coffee shop, and within 3 minutes, he was able to break into their network. Recognize Darnley used to work with CSIS, okay? And so his knowledge and skill set is extremely exceptional, but this was actually something really easy to do, and it was just in an actual local coffee shop around here, which then allowed him to have access to see what everybody was doing if he wanted to do that and capture any data that he wanted to capture. So, you know, there's that side. How do you actually secure that network if you did have a public access network? But then on the other side, if you now are on your phone sort of getting into that coffee shop's network, or if you're on your laptop doing the same thing, and there's a guy in the corner who's now sort of watching what's going on, how do you protect yourself?
Well, the next time people are going to see me in a coffee shop, they're going to run. But no, with that, you know, I know Kyle loves my credentials, but really, a teenager can be able to do this. Even any one of you can do this. And I say this because when I went to this coffee shop, and I won't name the name for, you know, sake of their secrecy, that when I went to the barista and I mentioned or asked them for the Wi-Fi password because I had some work to do and I needed the resources, I logged on. The barista mentioned to me, sorry, that the network's slow, blah blah blah, and I said, okay, well, I'm Mr. Curiosity, so I'm going in and poking around. And I got into the router, and knowing this router, the default configurations, because I've seen these things so many times, not even funny, then I just said, you know what the heck, I'm just going to throw the default password at it, and I did, and that gave me complete access to their network, where their merchant services pad was connected to, all their users were connected to, all the customers were there on their computers, and as I looked around, I saw a lot of people on their one was on their bank. Some people were on Facebook, some people were just browsing the internet. But basically, I sat there getting access to the network. I went into the Wi-Fi settings and I just changed the name of the Wi-Fi, the SSID. I just changed the name. And people were complaining. The second I hit OK, the network was down. No one's able to access the internet. The baristas were freaking out because they didn't know what was going on. And it got a lot of angry patrons. So I actually took one of the baristas aside and mentioned to him that, you know, this is what I did, blah, 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 and I wanted to speak to one of the owners to rectify it. But this just basically illustrates how easy it is for someone, even with credentials like myself, but just by throwing a default password at these routers, would be able to gain complete access to it. And the person with the right information would be able to capture all the packets. So kind of going back to what Kyle was saying, well, what do you do to protect yourself? Well, first and foremost, never do anything that reveals information. So, for example, banking information or accessing your Facebook, whatever, on the network, on a secure channel. Because what would happen, for example, if I actually turn on what we call a packet sniffer, I'll be able to look at all the packets coming to and from the network. Even though they may be able to access the internet, nothing seems to be wrong, I'm sitting there on the edge of the network, and I'm be able to capture all those packets. So every time someone sends a password, every time someone logs in with credentials, my computer will sit there and capture all that information. So what I can do is, oh look, there's a credit card number there. Let me use that. Oh look, there's a password and a username for a banking, for a banking website. I can take that as well. So it's really important to kind of go, again, like I said, going back to what Kyle was saying, having sort of VPN service, so a private, virtual private network in the local network. So what that would do is basically it'll encapsulate, so kind of it'll tunnel in that local network a encrypted source. So information going to and from that network will be encrypted. So for sake of example, if I'm there sniffing the network, I won't be able to see what's going back and forth. So that adds an extra layer of protection for you. So if you need to do banking, if you need to do your work, you'll be able to do that on a secure channel without the concern of being vulnerable.
Yeah, and I would say that VPN conversation is beyond the scope of this this webinar. So my recommendation, if you do have further questions about protecting the mobile devices, is to reach out to Darnley. Direct, his email address is right there. One thing that you could do today, even at your home, is just make sure that you change the password on your router. Because I would guess that most people have the default admin password. I know I personally went home and changed mine after I learned this from Darnley, and that's where we're at today. So that's my email address there as well. So if you have questions following this, I'll make sure to forward on into the right hands. But you've been invited here from somebody from the Bryson team or from Darnley. So feel free to reach out to any of us to ask your questions or get anything followed up. Thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you, Darnley, for giving us some time. Darnley, by the way, is a new father of a second child, so he made extra special time to be here with us today. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care.